webinar, MedDRA Coding Basics. My name is Suzanne Sour Shaker, or Shaker, both are correct. I will be your MSSO instructor for today. Joining me is my colleague, Hannah Eaton, who is an MSSO training coordinator, and Hannah will kindly facilitate our session today. So I want to start us off with introductions. I am a medical officer with the MSSO team. I'm based in New Jersey on the East Coast of the US. Prior to joining the MSSO, I spent about 20 years in the industry, mainly in the world of clinical research. And in today's webinar, we do have a hands-on exercise session later on, which we'll be using PollEV for. So the polling tool access is on your screen. At this time, I'll ask that you please sign into PollEV. It will give you the chance to test it out to ensure you can participate in the exercises at the end, and would also help us know our audience today a little bit better as it walks you through a few questions. With a reminder that all responses coming through the tool will be anonymized. So I'm just going to give you a few seconds to get the QR code, and we can get started with the first question. The first question will ask, where are you calling from today? And as more pins get added to the map, so a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is scheduled for 2 hours. The primary focus for the webinar is an introduction to basic coding with MedDRA. If there are more advanced topics you're interested in, like advanced coding or medication errors or analysis with MedDRA or SMQs, we invite you to check out the scheduled offerings under meddra.org. Under the training tab via the option schedule, you can pick your topic in the language of your choosing. And as we go through our slides today, if you have any questions, please post them in the question box on the right corner of your screen, and Hannah will bring them to my attention. We'll also open up a Q&A session at the end. So what wonderful. I'll see a lot of pins coming through. So welcome everyone from all over the world. This is a testament to the fact that MedDRA truly is a global standard. Happy to have you with us, and I appreciate you taking the time today, whether it's early in the day or late in the day for you. So thank you for joining. So the next question will be, what is your primary role or roles? So you can put as many as apply to you that you perform in your organization. You can also post any roles from previous lives as they apply. And I see the majority, as usual, are from pharmacovigilance teams or drug device safety, but I see a wide spectrum of colleagues from all over the industry. So again, this shows that MedDRA is really an adaptable tool used by different teams and functionalities. And I do hope that you come away today with the sense that MedDRA is a tool at your disposal. It's meant to be leveraged to best assist you with your different roles and responsibilities. So wonderful, all over the spectrum. All right, so next will be the question of how experienced are you with MedDRA? So again, this is meant to be a basics coding webinar, so we expect most attendees to be early introductees to MedDRA, which is the case here. I do see folks with a lot of experience in MedDRA, so happy to have you join for a refresher course as well. All right, wonderful. So before we get started on the slides, this is our disclaimer and copyright notice. MedDRA is owned by the ICH. And just like MedDRA is owned by the ICH, the slides that we are presenting to you are also owned by the ICH and copyright protected to the ICH. However, with the exception of the MedDRA and the ICH logos, the information that you see on the slides can be incorporated into work that you share with colleagues if that's of benefit to you. However, if you make any changes or modifications or translations, then please demarcate them clearly and avoid any insinuation that these changes have been endorsed by the ICH. The next bullet point is our warranty reminder that these slides are presented as is without warranty of any kind. And the third bullet point does not apply because we don't have third-party material today. So today we're going to go over a bit of MedDRA's scope, its structure, its characteristics. We're going to discuss the importance of having coding conventions and introduce you to the ICH endorsed coding conventions termed the MedDRA term selection points to consider. We're going to learn about the types of MedDRA browsers and introduce you to the newest release of the web-based browser with a demo. And then we're going to use that browser to do some hands-on exercises with MedDRA and conclude with a Q&A session. So every time I present an overview of MedDRA, I do like to show our website and kind of highlight this logo at the top right. This is the logo of the ICH because MedDRA is owned by the ICH. And the history of MedDRA is tied to the history of the ICH. So when you look up that snippet on the ICH website about the need to harmonize, they do mention that the beginning of having oversight for medicinal products before releasing to the market often came at the result of tragedies, and the most common one that many of us are familiar with is the tragedy of thalidomide in Europe in the 1960s, where pregnant women were exposed to a drug they thought was a safe sedative and ended up with a horrific spectrum of congenital deformities over a wide range of countries. A large number of people were exposed. That tragedy led to a lot of rules and regulations in the 60s and 70s, which made it harder for manufacturers to comply with all of these different regulations in different regions of the world. And so that cost got added to healthcare cost to the end user, as well as limited availability of new products in different regions. So Europe initiated a idea of harmonization of technical requirements, which proved successful. And that was joined by the US and Japan in the early 90s, which resulted in the birth of ICH. And very early on in their history, ICH realized that there is a need to have a standard for documentation of data in order to be able to compare it, share it, analyze it, and understand it across different regions, different indications, different products, and across time. And that's where the idea of MedDRA came from. So most of you on the call, I'm sure, are familiar with the ICH guidelines that are related to quality, safety, efficacy. Many of these guidelines also touch base on which level of MedDRA to use. For example, the DSUR and the PBRA guidelines mention which levels of MedDRA to use in reporting. And there's a multidisciplinary guideline as well as as part of the ICH work spectrum, the first of which is the MedDRA guideline. So MedDRA is in fact an ICH standard. It is a multidisciplinary M1 ICH standard, and you can see the implementation dates for the different regions of the world on the ICH website. So I always like to start with this before we move on to the remainder of our slides. So MedDRA was developed, like we said, by under the auspices of the ICH. The activities of my team, the MedDRA Maintenance and Support Services Organization, the MSSO, are overseen by the ICH MedDRA Management Committee. And it is composed of the different types of ICH parties, which represent both the regulators as well as the regulated parties of the industry, in addition to MHRA from the UK, Health Canada, WHO as observer. So MedDRA is a clinically validated dictionary. And what that means is that the maintenance of MedDRA and any edits made to MedDRA go through review by a group of qualified international physicians who are experts in MedDRA. The scope of MedDRA encompasses medical, health-related, and regulatory concepts pertaining to biopharmaceutical industry, and not just for drugs, but also for vaccines, biologics, devices, drug-device combinations, and types of products which are regulated in at least one region, like food or cosmetics. The MedDRA terminology applies to all phases of development of medical products for human use. The only exclusion is animal toxicology. So there are no terms for animal toxicology within MedDRA. The terminology in MedDRA was developed for regulators and the regulated medical product industry in both pre and post marketing phases of the regulatory process. So you're talking about clinical studies, spontaneous adverse reactions and events, regulatory submissions, and the regulated product information. So you'll see MedDRA used in ICSRs, in safety summaries, in clinical study reports, in brochures, in marketing applications, in prescribing information, and in countries that allow for direct to consumer advertising, you'll see MedDRA used in commercials. When you think of what outside the scope of MedDRA. So outside the blue circle is outside of the scope of MedDRA. From the perspective of data collection design, these tend to be data that is already standardized and summarized without the need for MedDRA. So, for example, the type of clinical trial design, whether it's double blind or single blind, if you have any cohorts, patient demographics. So, MedDRA does not collect age groupings or gender or ethnicity. These tend to be collected in a way where they can be easily summarized. However, there are terms within MedDRA that may reference gender if relevant for a unique medical concept. So, for example, male breast cancer versus female breast cancer does exist in MedDRA and would be relevant to differentiate from a medical perspective. Age may be relevant in certain cases where the population is significant to the medical concept. So, think about newborn conditions, neonatal conditions, elderly, pregnancy, perinatal conditions. Frequency qualifiers are not included in MedDRA. So when you say this event occurred frequently or rarely or X number of times, there are a few handful of terms in MedDRA that include, for example, intermittent, but frequency is not in the scope of MedDRA. Same for severity descriptors like mild, moderate, severe. These are not typically in MedDRA. There could be also exceptions to that with a few handful of terms like mild versus severe mental retardation. Numerical values for results, of course, are outside of the scope of MedDRA. So numerical lab results would not be expected to be found in MedDRA. But MedDRA does have qualifiers that can show whether a lab result was out of range by using increased, decreased, normal, abnormal, and so on. And of course, products. So whether a product is a specific drug, a specific equipment, a specific device or diagnostic product, these are outside of the scope of MedDRA. So for those of you who are uh, familiar with safety summaries or patient narratives, when you think of a summary that starts with a 50-year-old female patient from a specific ethnicity on a specific type of study, taking a specific product. Up until here, the information is not expected to be covered within MedDRA. What MedDRA is scoped for is within the blue circle. So it's scoped for standardizing and summarizing terms classified as medical and health related. So think of signs, symptoms, diseases, diagnoses, indications, names of investigations, qualitative results of investigations, like if an investigation was positive, negative, present, absent. It's also scoped for medical and surgical procedures. It's also scoped for medication errors and product quality terms, device-related issues, product issues, and also for medical history, family history, and social history. So even though social history and social circumstances are not typically regarded as medical terms, but they do fall within the scope of medical relevance. If you're thinking about, for example, evaluation of regulatory data in assessment of exposure to risk factors. So think of terms like foreign travel, that's in MedDRA, substance use is in MedDRA, tobacco use, bereavement, use of hair dye or specific types of diets. Those are all in MedDRA. Okay, so the build of MedDRA is a hierarchical system. There's 5 levels of MedDRA, and you can approach MedDRA either from a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. The terms are linked vertically. So each level from the bottom is subordinate to the linked term in the level above it, and those on the top are superordinate to the ones linked below them. When you are coding in MedDRA, basically you're interacting with MedDRA at the lowest level term, so the one on the bottom. And if you notice, it's the most granular. It has the most number of terms. So as of version 27, there were just under 90,000 terms. And now with the upcoming release, we're going to add about 1,500 to those LLTs. So when you're coding in MedDRA, basically what you're doing is you are selecting an existing lowest level term already in MedDRA. You may actually sometimes need more than one. So when you're selecting the LLT, you are finding the LLT or the lowest level term that best represents the original verbatim within the report that you received in its natural language. Many LLTs are siblings, meaning that they are sister terms that belong to a single unique medical concept. So, for example, one reporter may say, I suffered abdominal pain. Another reporter may say, my son had bellyache. A third reporter may say the patient suffered from abdominal cramps. But they all mean the same medical concept, only they're worded in different natural language options. So these are sibling LLTs. Some sibling LLTs may offer more specificity than other sibling LLTs. So a right arm fracture versus an arm fracture, the one that says right arm fracture is more specific, but it doesn't give you a different unique medical concept. So for example, in retinal hemorrhage, you could have pre-retinal hemorrhage or subretinal hemorrhage or fundal bleeding, but they're all types of retinal hemorrhage. So sibling LLTs can be grouped together as equivalent because they represent a single medical concept, whether they are semantically equivalent or synonymous. They are part of the same unique medical concept. One of these sibling LLTs would be preferred to all the rest to represent this unique standalone medical concept, and this becomes the level of the preferred term, the second up on the ladder. So one of these LLTs is also repeated at the PT level. So basically, every preferred term, these 26,000 that you see on your screen, every preferred term in MedDRA is duplicated at the LLT level, same text, same numeric code. As you go higher up the hierarchy, the related PTs get grouped together in the next level in a medically meaningful way. And this becomes the high level term, the HLT. This grouping can be based on, for example, anatomy or pathology or physiology or function. And then again, every related HLTs, they also get grouped together in a medically significant way at the high level group terms. And those get grouped into 27 system organ classes or SOCs. And that final grouping is either done by etiology or site of manifestation or purpose. So notice how the number of terms available over the level, they contract significantly as you go higher up the hierarchy. So starting from 90 some thousand or just under 90 some thousand to 27 system organ classes. And that's how the signal gets condensed. So this is how the use of MedDRA in data analysis and signal detection works by condensing that signal and contracting the numbers as you go higher up. In many organizations, the summarization and the analysis starts at the preferred term level, at the PT level. So this is a very important level, and it's also the level used in reporting and submissions. So for example, if you reference ICH guidelines for DSUR and PBRO guidances, you'll see the PT level highlighted as required. Okay, so what do these 27 system organ classes look like? If you take a look, many of them look like their body systems. So you see cardiac disorders, you see ear, you see eye, gastrointestinal, and so on and so forth. But there are system organ classes that serve etiology. So you will have, for example, infections and infestations, the uh, infections and infestations. You'll have neoplasms, benign and malignant, and congenital disorders. But you also have other system organ classes that serve other purposes like product issues or investigations or surgeries or social circumstances. So here is a simplified example of the hierarchy. It doesn't show you all the possible options at each level, of course, but it gives you an idea of how the terms become less specific the higher up you go in the hierarchy. They tend to be single terms at the LLT and the PT levels and plural terms at the HLT and higher levels. So if you have an LLT of arrhythmia, not otherwise specified, NOS, and LLT of arrhythmia and LLT of dysrhythmia, these are all sibling terms, and they are grouped under the preferred term of arrhythmia. But you also notice that one of them is red, and it says non-current, which is the LLT of other specified cardiac dysrhythmias. So we do have non-current LLTs that exist in MedDRA, and the non-currency only occurs at the LLT level. A bit more detail on the non-currency. So within MedDRA, you're going to see non-current LLTs with a red box. Non-current LLTs are only there for historical data purposes. So they can be there if you have legacy data or if you are interested in previous data previously mapped to previous versions of MedDRA, they are there. But non-current LLTs should never be used for coding. They were made non-current for a purpose. Either they were found to be vague or ambiguous, or they became outdated as new medical information became available, or they were found to be, for example, misspelled or truncated. Also, there are terms that were included in the original time of development of MedDRA from other terminologies like CoStart and WhoArt and older versions of ICD that don't really fit MedDRA placement guidelines. And so they were made non-current and they're all identified by the red box around the LLT. So when MedDRA was first created, they included such terms from other terminologies. And MedDRA was not created out of scratch. It was based off of a medical terminology standard in what is now called the MHRA, which is why the spelling in MedDRA at the PT level and higher is in the proper English, right? So you'll see the anemia with the AE spelling at the PT level, but the US spelling is also available at the LLT level. So for standardization to work, especially in electronic data exchange, there must be numeric codes. So there has to be a code in numeric format. Every single term in MedDRA is assigned a unique 8-digit numeric code that never changes. But just for full disclosure, in very older versions of MedDRA, between releases 2.1 and 5, a very small number of term names did actually have their codes changed. But ever since version 5, the MSSO does not change any numeric codes of MedDRA terms. Now, these codes are the same no matter what language of MedDRA you're using, which is really very helpful when you're comparing data across different regions of the world that speak different local languages. These codes are non-expressive, so the number itself is not going to tell you what level of MedDRA it is, whether it's an LLT or an HLGT or anything else. The numeric code is not going to tell you whether that LLT is current or non-current. It's not going to tell you which system organ class it belongs to, like if it's a cardiac term or an intestinal term. The only difference is that if it's a SOC hierarchy term, meaning LLT through system organ class, it starts with a 1. If it's an SMQ term, then it starts with a 2. And of course, these numeric codes played a very important role in E2B R3 submissions and electronic data exchange. Okay, multi-axiality is a term that can be confusing for newcomers to MedDRA. So as we showed in previous slides, the LLTs connect to the system organ class via a hierarchy, so via a path or an axis. Each LLT is only connected to one single preferred term. But if a preferred term can belong to more than one body system or to more than one system organ class, it can be connected to more than one SOC, so to more than one path or more than one axis. And that's called multi-axiality in MedDRA. The path that a preferred term takes to get to the system organ class usually depends on the site of primary manifestation. So if you have a medical concept that is a gastrointestinal concept, you would have the primary system organ class be the gastrointestinal system organ class. If you have a respiratory concept, it would go to the respiratory SOC as a primary connection, and so on and so forth. If the same medical concept belongs to more than one system organ class, so for example, shortness of breath or dyspnea, that can be a respiratory manifestation. It can also be linked to many heart diseases. In such cases, the preferred term can be linked to more than one system organ class, which is the multi-axial connection. But then there has to be assigned a primary system organ class to avoid double counting. So we don't want to see in our listing every single possible system organ class that the preferred term is linked to and have all these adverse events be double counted. So the assignment of a primary system organ class, it helps us avoid these double countings and keep MedDRA as a standardized tool. And this single primary system organ class is the one that is displayed during cumulative data outputs when you default to primary SOC view. The selection and the choice of the primary system organ class is predefined in MedDRA by the MSSO team, and it should not be changed by the end users. If you are able to change the primary system organ class allocation that's hardwired in MedDRA files, then you're changing the M1 ICH standard, which is the same standard that's used by the regulators and all the rest of the industry. So please do not change the primary system organ class allocation. But what you can do is you can change the data outputs. When you're doing your analysis and data review, you can change your view so that you can see the secondary system organ classes if you are interested in that view. And it is a very good tool to have. Okay, so here's an example of a medical term, obesity cardiomyopathy. It manifests as a cardiomyopathy, so it's linked primarily to the cardiac system organ class on the right hand of your screen in blue. However, this is also a condition that is related to obesity. So the same preferred term has a secondary link to the metabolism and nutritional disorders. When you are running your data output and you're defaulting to your primary SOC view, you're only going to see this listed once under the cardiac disorders. But if you are interested in obesity disorders for your particular product, you can run your data outputs to show the secondary system organ class, and you'll be able to see it grouped with other types of terms that are linked to the obesity disorders and metabolism nutrition disorder SOC. Here's another example is the influenza. So influenza is an infection in the lungs, in the respiratory system. So the primary link would be to the infection and infestation system organ class, and the secondary link would be to the respiratory system organ class. But you might ask, well, why is that? Why is it not linked primarily to the respiratory system organ class? Because it primarily manifests in the respiratory system. So we have rules for assigning the primary system organ class allocation. The first one is really simple. If the PT is only linked to one system organ class, then it's automatically assigned that system organ class as primary. If the PT is for a disease, sign, or symptom, the general rule is that it would be assigned to the site of manifestation as the primary system organ class. But there are three important exceptions to that rule. And to understand this exception, I'm going to show you this picture. So this is a picture from the internet about a thalidomide baby. And right away, the first thing that you can notice is that thalidomide really impacted the development of the fetuses in really very sad ways. And one of the common ones are musculoskeletal deformities, where they had missing or deformed limbs. So you'll see this child showing that manifestation of congenital deformity in the musculoskeletal system. But thalidomide had a very wide range of different body systems that it affected. So some children also had congenital deformities in the eyes, in the ears, in the heart, in the gastrointestinal system, in the urinary system, and in the nervous system, among others. So some of them are visible from the outside and some of them are not. If you are interested in collecting a signal that shows that the product is leading to congenital deformities and you allow the disbursement of that signal to the different system organ classes, then you are losing that signal. So for example, if the congenital deformity in the arms went primarily to musculoskeletal system and in the heart primarily went to cardiac, then you're not really gathering that signal together. You're not aggregating the signal. So for the choice of primary system organ class during the build of MedDRA, what they did was they said if a medical concept could be a congenital condition, meaning that it's present at birth, then the primary system organ class would always be congenital regardless of where that body system location is. So congenital eye disorders will go primarily to the congenital SOC and then as a secondary link to eye. Heart will go primarily to cardiac and secondary to heart, and so on and so forth. What other important safety signals there are for any products? So one is can it cause a congenital deformity? 2 is, can it cause cancer? And 3 is, can it cause an infection? And those are the three main, what do we call them, exclusions to the rule that says the primary is the site of manifestation. So if there is an infection term, then the primary system organ class would be the infection sock and not the site of manifestation, which explains that influenza link. And for the neoplasms, the primary link would be the neoplasms, benign and malignant and unspecified, and the secondary would be the site of manifestation. So I hope I made that clear, but if you have any questions on that, please add them to the question box and Hannah will bring them up to my attention. Okay, what happens if a term can be linked to more than one of these three very important safety signals? What happens if there is a congenital infection? What happens if there is a congenital cancer? How does MedDRA prioritize which becomes the primary system organ class? So as you can see on the screen, the most important one would be the congenital signal, and then the neoplasms, and then the infections. So that would be the order of importance if the same medical concept can be linked to more than one of these three exceptions. Okay, there are also SOCs in MedDRA that are exclusive to all else, meaning that PTs within these system organ classes will not be linked to any other system organ class. And these three are the investigations, surgical and medical procedures, and social circumstances. This becomes really important to keep in mind when you're thinking about data retrieval and query building. But that is not the focus for today. So today we want to take a closer look at coding with MedDRA. But just as a reminder, not every single PT in MedDRA is multi-axial, and there are PTs in MedDRA that only belong to one system organ class, and there are 3 system organ classes that are exclusive to all else. Okay, before we go to coding conventions, Hannah, I'm going to stop here and ask, are there any questions so far?
I am not seeing any questions in the chat at the moment.
Okay, awesome. All right, so why do we need coding conventions? Coding conventions are written guidelines and they are principles that guide you through how to use MedDRA to be specific in coding, but also to achieve consistency in coding. And I think consistency in coding is really, really important because the more consistent you are when you are coding like terms, the better the quality of your output for data analysis, because the higher the chance you'll have of grouping terms together that are similar. Conventions play a big role in data exchange harmonization on a global scale. So conventions include a wide variety of topics. And of course, some of the common examples, how to handle misspelled verbatims or abbreviations or acronyms, how to approach combination terms, when to query, when to avoid the autoencoding allowances, and so on and so forth. Conventions are an important tool for coders, especially when your team vary in their backgrounds and in their medical knowledge and in their experience. So since MedDRA, as we saw at the LLT level, offers a large number of options that you can choose from when you're selecting the LLT term, it becomes clear that coding conventions can be really important tool for the team. And even if you're using an autoencoder tool, so manual review in these cases is always advised because the autoencoder does not necessarily approach terms in a medically logical way. So some autoencoders just look for textual matches, of course, depending on the way your autoencoding tool is programmed. But this can lead to some obvious errors in an autoencoder. So for example, allergic to CAT scan, in a particular autoencoder was coded to allergic to cats just because of the textual order of the alphabets. Myocardial infarction in the fall of 2000 was autoencoded to MI and fall rather than the season. So ICH has understood that there is a need for uh, coding guidelines on a global scale, and ICH has provided an ICH endorsed coding guideline encompassing coding guidelines for industry and regulatory purposes, and it's titled MedDRA Term Selection Points to Consider. So we said when you're coding in MedDRA, what you're doing is you are selecting a MedDRA term at the LLT level. So MedDRA term selection is basically coding. And these are points to consider, meaning things that you want to think about. So the PTC guide facilitates consistent selection, and it is recommended as the basis for each organization-specific coding conventions. So in my 20 years experience in the industry, I've always had organization-specific coding conventions, but the level at which these are created can vary from organization to organization. So you could have organizational level guidelines and then get further customized at the product level or indication level, sometimes at the study specific level. The ICH endorsed coding guidelines is developed by a working group of the ICH Management Committee and includes representatives from global regulators worldwide as well as industry representatives. So both sides of the industry will have their voices heard for the creation and update and upkeep of these coding guidelines. This document is released every March with the March version of MedDRA. So it's coming up now next month and fully available in 6 different languages. There are also condensed versions available in many languages and easily accessible on the MedDRA website. Of course, in some scenarios, there could be more than one approach to the coding decision. So ICH also acknowledges that there are different users for MedDRA and the same option may not apply to every single user of MedDRA. So they do provide preferred option when there's more than one way of coding the same term. And they also tell you if you don't follow the preferred option, that's quite all right. As long as you are, like we said, consistent in your organization. And it's always a good idea to document your approach if it differs from the PTC preferred option. Um, these are some of the general principles within the ICH coding guidelines, the MTS points to consider, and we'll be going over these in more details in the following slides. So let's start with quality. When we talk about quality data for purposes of coding, we can think of 2 types of data. The first is the original reported verbatim or the source verbatim that you're getting from your reporter. So when you think about how to ensure the best quality in source verbatim, think about how you can optimize data collection in your design, how to train the staff responsible like reporters, collectors, reviewers, coders, analyzers, and whether you can obtain clarification for data that is ambiguous, confusing, or unintelligible. The second data source for your analysis is the coded data, the ones that you coded into MedDRA. And organizations can optimize the quality there, like we said, by documenting their term selection methods and quality assurance procedures in coding guidelines, making sure that their coding guidelines are consistent with the ICH endorsed MTS PTC document. And of course, human oversight. So human oversight of term selection performed, especially when it's performed by IT tools, is needed to assure that the end result fully reflects the reported information and makes medical sense. So in my experience, usually the review was done by a qualified individual with medical background who was also trained on MedDRA coding. This is probably one of the most important principles in the ICH guidelines is do not change MedDRA. So as we said, MedDRA is an ICH M1 standard. It has a predefined term hierarchy. When you're coding in MedDRA, all you are doing is you are selecting the LLT that best matches your verbatim, but MedDRA has everything else set up already. So the way the LLT is linked to the PT and the PT to the rest of the access through to the system organ class is predefined hierarchy in MedDRA. So please do not make any ad hoc structural alterations in MedDRA. Don't change the primary SOC allocation. If you change the primary SOC allocation, you are changing the M1 standard and no longer using the same MedDRA that the regulators and everybody else in the industry is using. However, if you notice that there are maybe deficiencies in MedDRA where you are not finding what you're expecting in the terms of the hierarchy, or if you don't agree with the primary SOC allocation, you can always submit a change request to the MSSO, and these all get reviewed by the International Medical Officers team for consideration. So if you notice or if you consider that you're not in agreement or you want to make a recommendation to change a primary system organ class, please do that by the change request process. Okay, so when we talk about certain guidelines in terms of coding, we said that the coding starts at the LLT level. So always select an LLT level when you are coding and try to find the LLT level that is the closest possible reflection of your original verbatim. So we said MedDRA has a large number of LLTs. We said close to 90,000 or under that. And if you consider that the non-current LLTs should not be used, let's take off another 10,000 or so, maybe 10,000 or so. But still, it's a large number of LLTs to go through. When you are trying to find the LLT that best matches your verbatim, you want to try and find as much information in the same LLT as you can that includes whatever details you have in your report. So think about this term. It's abscess on face. You will find abscess in MedDRA, but abscess can be found in multiple different locations, not just the face. And if you put abscess and face both in the search field in MedDRA, you may not necessarily find it, but there is a specific term for that location. So like we said, different abscesses can be in the brain, in the lung, on the skin, subcutaneous, and so on. But if you try to look for face specifically with abscess in MedDRA, even though that doesn't exist, there is facial. And what that kind of hint tells you is that when you're looking in the search field within MedDRA, try to use roots of words. So if you put abscess and FAC, you'll be able to pull up facial. But if you put abscess and face, you won't be able to pull up facial abscess. So just as a hint. And of course, a reminder that non-current LLTs are mainly for legacy conversion and historical purposes. They are not to be used for coding. But of course, if you do find yourself always maybe creating a workaround or organization-specific solutions when you're coding, and you have found a deficiency in MedDRA, so if there's no really good MedDRA term available for your purposes, you can always request a term to be added to MedDRA by the change request tool. Having said that, of course, not every possible verbatim is expected to have an exact match in MedDRA. If an exact match can't be found, there may be one that is similar or synonymous or close enough that represents the same condition. So please use medical judgment before you try to submit all the change requests. Okay, of course, one of the really basic criteria when you're coding is that you're coding your verbatim. So you're limiting yourself to your selection of LLTs against what your source is providing you. So you do need to select terms for all the details that you have in your adverse report or adverse event, regardless of causality. So it doesn't necessarily need to be causal to your product to be coded. And of course, MedDRA has terms that can be used for device events, product quality issues, medication errors, social history, medical history, like we said, indications, investigations, and so on and so forth. But coding must be supported by your source. So we don't add information and we also don't remove information when we're coding. So for example, if you have a reporter that sent in a report and the report says this patient complained of abdominal pain, increased serum amylase, and increased serum lipase. If you have a medical background or if somebody in your team has a medical background, they may be tempted to think, well, it's possible that what's going on here is pancreatitis. And that might be the case. This patient may indeed be experiencing pancreatitis. However, the report that you received did not specifically point out a diagnosis of pancreatitis. So in this kind of situation, we cannot make any assumptions. We can't assume that this is a report of pancreatitis. We can only code what we received, which are the signs and symptoms or lab results or whatever detail that we received. So in this particular example, what the ICH endorsed guidelines will tell you is do not assume a diagnosis, only code what you received. And so you code the signs and the symptoms. However, if you're able to elicit more information from the reporter, then by all means, you can reach out to the reporter and say, you sent us this report, but are you reporting a diagnosis? And if so, what is the single diagnosis? Like, are you reporting pancreatitis or something else? So the ICH endorsed guidelines has really a wide selection of topics that you can look through. So as you can see example on this page, and even the next slide has even more, you can see the different types of scenarios that the ICH endorsed guidelines can walk you through. So if you have a body versus event specificity term, if you have a term that has a location but also a specific microorganism for an infection, if you have a term that talks about a medical procedure, or if you have a suicide term or self-harm term, misuse and abuse, overdose, toxicity, device terms, drug interactions, even situations where there is no clinical sequelae to the patient. So if there is no adverse event, or if there's a normal term, or if there's an unexpected therapeutic effect, how do you code off-label terms? So all of these scenarios are included in the ICH endorsed guidelines. And of course, because the ICH endorsed guidelines is a relatively big enough document that it's hard to review the entirety of it. What I do recommend is as you're coding terms or as you are reviewing terms, it's always a good idea to pull up the section that is close to the scenario you're working on and see what the ICH endorsed guidelines recommends you do, and then check your own organization guidelines. Are they consistent or not? Okay, so before we move on to browsers, Hannah, at this time I'm going to stop and ask, are there any questions?
Perfect. Our first question asks, are the multi-axial too many or limited?
Are the multi-axial too many or limited? I'm not 100% sure I understand the question, but let me just explain that not every single term in MedDRA is multi-axial, meaning that there are plenty of medical concepts that don't need to be linked to more than one system organ class. If there are terms in MedDRA that are multi-axial, then they can be connected to multiple system organ classes, not just one, not just two, not just three. I think the largest we have is 8, if I remember correctly, but there really is no specific limit as to how many, if the term really does require that it be connected to multiple system organ classes. So I hope I answered that, but if I did not understand the question correctly, please come back again with a bit more detail.
Wonderful. Our next question asks, I want to ask about primary sock. If an event has more than one sock, do we have to choose the one where the symptoms appeared?
That's a good question. So the short answer is no. You don't have to choose the SOC. All you have to do is choose the LLT. So when you are coding, basically what you're doing is you are choosing the lowest level term. But one thing I will point out to you is that when you are choosing that lowest level term, just take a look at the hierarchy to make sure that it makes sense to you. So, for example, if you are trying to code something that's happening in a newborn baby, and you notice that a newborn baby was reported to have a whatever the condition that it was, you need to make sure that the term you're selecting is in fact a congenital linked term that goes to the congenital sock. Because if it doesn't go to the congenital sock, then you're not in the right area. You're not looking in the right area. So the short answer is no. When you are coding in MedDRA, it's not on you to select the system organ class. You just need to select the LLT, and everything else is already linked and predefined. So as long as you selected the lowest level term in MedDRA that is the closest term to whatever verbatim you have to code, then you follow the hierarchy itself is available to you. It's predefined. It's pre-created already by the MSSO. So I hope that answers your question. But again, if you want to send us a follow-up, please do so.
Great.
Any other
Our next,
questions?
yes, we've had quite a few come in. Our
Okay.
next one says, if an AE is mentioned as part of disease symptoms, should it also be coded even though no casualty is implied to suspect product by the reporter?
So causality is not something that will affect how you code a specific term. So if you have an adverse event that is reported prior to exposure to the product, you're still coding that to MedDRA. If you have an adverse event that is reported after exposure to a product, you are also coding that in MedDRA. So regardless of whether or not you are suspecting a causal relationship between the product and your event, all events need to be coded to MedDRA. But in terms of whether or not you're coding the diagnosis as well as the signs and symptoms, maybe this is a good opportunity to show you where to find that answer. So you can also come back to it and you can also share with your colleagues. So this is our website, and the way that you access the PTC guidance document is by a quick link on the top right-hand corner. So I hope I'm showing it clearly. If you click on PTC, it's going to default to under how to use support documentation. It's going to take you straight to there, and it's going to default with the blue ribbon toggled open. And the blue ribbon is the points to consider document. If I click on, and of course it's available in different formats, so you have the Word document, the PDF, and so on. If I open up the MedDRA term selection points to consider document, and I'm looking at the table of contents, and I'm looking for specifically for diagnosis, signs, and symptoms, right? So if I diagnosis, signs, and symptoms, because I just received an adverse event that has diagnosis along with signs and symptoms, I'm going to see what the ICH endorsed guidelines tell me to do, and it will tell me that if there is a diagnosis reported with relevant signs and symptoms, only select a term for the diagnosis. Of course, as long as the signs and symptoms belong to that diagnosis. So chest pain due to MI would be coded to MI. You don't have to code the chest pain separately. And again, not everybody will be under the same approach. Some organizations, and I've known colleagues in different organizations, they code everything. So that's up to your organizational approach, as long as it's documented and consistently followed. But the ICH endorsed guidelines will tell you, well, consider that you may not need a specific term for the signs and symptoms. You just need a specific term for the diagnosis, as long as all the signs and symptoms you have in your report match up to that diagnosis. So I hope I answered that question, but if not, please come back with a follow-up question. Anything else, Hannah?
Um, this is kind of a related question about AEs. So if a site enters an AE but is really not an AE, should we code no adverse effect slash normal term?
So if the site reports an AE, but it's not an AE, this is a very hypothetical question, right? So, but I'll show you another thing in the ICH endorsed guidelines, because how would you term that it's not an AE? But here's a let me just see if I can find the section when there's no adverse event, right? So the site may have reported something like the child ingested a medication by accident, but there were no signs or symptoms or nothing, no clinical sequelae reported. So let me just see if I can find here, no adverse effect. I think this is the part that you're talking about. So if there is absence of an adverse event or absence of an adverse reaction, and that is specifically reported, it really depends on what it is you're trying to extract from that information. Some organizations, they may want to say that there is no adverse effect because they are tracking all of these exposure terms and they have to know whether or not following an exposure, an event happened or not. So think about, for example, poison control centers. if they receive a call and it says my son drank this particular cleaning fluid, but I didn't notice that anything happened to him, they need to report that somewhere. So there are options in MedDRA that says that there is no adverse effect. The preferred option, though, in ICH endorsed guidelines is that when it's an AE, you don't need to report no adverse event as the AE, because what you are doing is you are adding a count to your AE when there is a negative. It's not really an AE. So you can take a look at, the ICH endorsed guidelines, and you can also join us. I think in March there is a advanced MedDRA coding that also give examples of these situations when there is no adverse event. So I hope I answered that question, but again, please come back with a follow-up if you have anything further. Anything else, Hannah?
Our next question asks, possibly already explained, but I would like to know if it is or not advisable for the reporter to choose a branch of the term. For example, for the case of influenza, to choose the respiratory SOC instead of the infectious SOC.
So the reporter is the person who sends you the original term. The reporter does not really select system organ classes from MedDRA. Basically, when you receive a verbatim from the reporter, that verbatim needs to be assigned a matching LLT from MedDRA that is the closest possible option in MedDRA to that verbatim. When you select that LLT, the hierarchy is predefined in MedDRA. So, okay, so let me show you an example. Let's open up the older version of the WBB before I walk you through the new one, and let's put influenza. Okay, so influenza is linked to two different system organ classes because it is a respiratory concept. It's a respiratory medical concept, but it's also an infectious concept. And even if the reporter gives you all these different types or specific types of the influenza, so here's pneumonia due to H influenza, it is still linked to the infection SOC. So even if the reporter tells me this is a pneumonia type of infection, specifically in the lung, and I know the lung is a respiratory body system, but it is still an infectious term. And because it is an infection term, it has to be primarily linked in MedDRA to the infection and infestation system organ class, and the secondary will be the site of manifestation. So the reporter cannot select the system organ class. I hope I answered your question. Anything else, Hannah?
Fantastic. We actually had a follow-up from the earlier question about primary SOCs. They said, if I would like to group LLTs, but one LLT has more than one SOC, which one do I choose? For example, anaphylactic shock, immune system disorders, but also vascular disorders, which group would the user assign it to?
Okay, so here's what the anaphylactic shock looks like, right? Um, when you have an LLT, the LLT, as you can see, the LLT can only be linked to one PT. So the LLT, at the LLT level, we don't consider the LLT being linked to multiple preferred terms. So each LLT is only linked to one preferred term, but the multi-axiality can start at the preferred term level because the preferred term are the unique medical concepts, and the preferred terms are the ones used in reporting and regulatory submissions and so on and so forth. So you're going to see that when a term is multi-axial, from the LLT to the PT is one single connection, but after the PT, you can see all of these different connections. Now, the same preferred term can be linked to more than one system organ class. You, as a coder, you're not expected to select one of these system organ classes. they exist as predefined in MedDRA. They are already in MedDRA. There's already multi-axiality in MedDRA. But what you can do is you can select the LLT to say that this is an anaphylactic shock. This term represents an anaphylactic shock. MedDRA will connect this LLT to the PTF anaphylactic shock. And when you send your data for analysis, the data reviewer can see them in multiple different types of output. So the data reviewer, the person who's going to assess this information, can see this either as a default primary SOC listing, which is the normal listing. So when you have line listings of your data, it's usually defaulted to the primary system organ class, and many companies output them, by sorting by system organ class because you want to see if there is a signal in any particular system organ class, and then dig deeper. So they're going to see this under the immune system disorder, right? But if you're also interested in vascular disorders, you can always output your data under the secondary system organ class view. You can also use any of our tools, the hierarchy analysis tool in MedDRA, to show your data in all of its connections. So you can input your data into this hierarchy analysis tool, and it will show you all the different system organ classes that this term is linked to. So when you're looking at your output data, if you have your product, is causing vascular issues, this anaphylactic shock will also show up with the vascular disorder SOC when you're looking at your data in the secondary system organ class view. But you're not expected to select a system organ class. It's pre-selected for you. So I hope that answers that question. But if you do have more questions about, data outputs and how to view data and how to leverage the secondary system organ class in viewing data and analyzing data, I do advise you to, attend one of our data analysis with MedDRA webinars because they really speak in more details to this part of using MedDRA. Any other questions, Hannah?
Great. Our next question says, if the patient dies in our report, is there a way for us to decide which AR should be selected fatal, or do we always stick with just what is reported?
Another good question. So let me also show you where to find the answer to that in case you want to go to it again. So let's go back to our PTCs and our points to consider, and let's go pull up and let's see if I just put in death. So death and other patient outcomes. Okay, death is an outcome, right? So most folks on the line are pharmacovigilance, and I think a typical approach in pharmacovigilance when you have a death is you want to know the cause of the death, the underlying cause of the death or causes of the death. So death, disability, and hospitalization are considered outcomes, and typically in any data design, these outcomes have their own specific fields for capturing these outcomes, or they could also be safety or SAE criteria, right? So death as an outcome is usually not itself considered as the adverse event or the adverse reaction. If you have an AE that is fatal and caused death, then the recommended approach is only to record the underlying cause of the death, whatever the event was that was fatal. But the death itself should have its own appropriate data field. However, sometimes you have death as the only information that you received. So if the only information that you received is death, you do have death terms that you can find in MedDRA, incidentally under the general system organ class, right? So you do have death terms that can be selected in MedDRA, but typically death with an AE or an AR would not be coded itself because it's an outcome. You just code the underlying cause of death. So I hope I answered that question. Anything else, Hannah?
Perfect. Our last question that we have at the moment says, can I please ask if a patient report to pharmacists has an adverse event allergic reaction, and then we get the contact details of the patient and we conduct a follow-up, and the patient reports to us the adverse event pruritus? Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Do you code both
Pruritus?
the events? Pruritus, thank you. Do we
Mhm.
code both the events or just one?
Okay, so that goes back to a diagnosis with signs and symptoms. If your adverse event or if your report indicated that there was pruritus, and along with the pruritus, this was a manifestation of an allergic reaction manifested by pruritus, then you have a diagnosis that it was an allergic reaction. But if the only information you have is pruritus, then you can code the pruritus unless you have information that this was a sign or symptom of an allergic reaction. So if you have all the information together, then it is a sign and symptom of allergic reaction. You don't need to code it separately. If the only information you have is the pruritus or the redness or whatever the manifestation is, then you code the sign and symptom. But if you have the same report with all of this detailed information, where the signs and the symptoms along with a diagnosis, then you just need the diagnosis. Of course, some organizations, like I said, they code everything. And join us for the advanced MedDRA coding. I think there's one next month. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about diagnosis with signs and symptoms versus provisional diagnosis with signs and symptoms. Anything else, Hannah?
We did have one more question come in. It says, how do I separate reactions when reporting when I have the same PT for different LLTs? For example, for hepatitis drug-induced and drug-induced hepatotoxicity, PT is drug-induced liver injury.
So I'm not 100% sure I'm following the question. So how do
Sounds like they
I
were given the PT drug-induced liver injury with the LLTs under it. How do I separate reactions when reporting when I have the same PT for different LLTs?
Okay, so the intent of the PT, and let me put up drug-induced hepatotoxicity goes to drug-induced liver injury. Okay, so the intent of the PT itself is already aggregated data. And let me just show you something. If you right-click and go to browser, and I'm doing all of this on the old browser and I want to show you the new one, but let's leave that for the next part of the presentation. Okay, this is drug-induced liver injury, right? So the drug-induced liver injury is in itself a preferred term. So it is an aggregated term. It collects all the subsumed LLTs under it. So if you have a reporter that says, you know, this patient suffered from drug-induced hepatitis, and another one that says this patient suffered from drug-induced hepatotoxicity, and another one that says this was a hepatitis allergic, but it was from a specific drug. So you have drug-induced allergic hepatitis. These are all kind of the same medical concept, that there was liver injury, which was drug-induced. If you leave them each as a separate medical concept, you're kind of scattering the signal already. Basically, what MedDRA tries to do when MedDRA was created, the intent of MedDRA was to identify safety signals. That's a crucial functionality that MedDRA performs. So it tries to identify safety signals by aggregating them together. Because all of these terminologies are belonging to the same kind of medical concept, they're all liver injury and they all were a result of exposure to a drug. So why would you want to separate that signal even further? So at the PT level, you are already aggregating these LLTs that are similar, but the LLTs are as close as possible to your verbatim. When you're reviewing your data, you can review it at the LLT level to see the level of detail that the reporter submitted. Yes, you can do that. But when you are aggregating the signal, you really want to group them already together because they're the same medical concept. So in order to highlight the signal and amplify it, you do want to keep the PT subsuming all of these similar LLTs together. These are all sibling LLTs. The LLTs become a bit more interesting when you have microorganisms. So if we go with staph infection, just to show you that. So when we go with staph infection and we go to the browser and we show what kind of LLTs are grouped under staph infection. We're going to see all these different kinds of specific types of staph infection, whether it's, for example, MRSA or ORSA, or whether it's the different specific types of the microorganism itself. that's where the LLT becomes a bit more interesting in your analysis, because you still want to group them. They're all staph infections. So you're already aggregating them at the PT level, but you're able to view them in your data outputs, if you so choose, to the level of detail that the report is submitted, right? But the PT level is the one that you're going to submit to your regulator when you send in your data. It's already aggregated. It's already collecting all of these sibling terms together in the same PT. I hope that answered your question, but please let us know if you have any follow-ups. So let's move on, Hannah, to the next part of it, and we can open it up again for questions at the next major section, because I do want to talk a little bit about the MedDRA browsers. Um, okay, let me close these down and go back to our homepage. Before we open the browsers, I want to show you how to get there. So a quick kind of overview of our website. So our homepage shows you all the different welcome notes in the different languages that MedDRA produces. We currently have 24 languages. Right off the right-hand side of our homepage is something we recently released. So if you are interested in training at your own pace, we have learning management system, or e-learning. So just to kind of show you examples of what the catalog has, you are able to get training certificates at your own pace. We have training available for introduction to MedDRA, basic coding, and advanced coding. You can log in with your MedDRA username and password. This is a very exciting development. And let me just go back to our homepage and kind of walk you through the other quick links. We talked about the PTC, but another way you can access the PTC is with this up pointing arrow. We talked about our offerings. So if you click on this calendar icon, you can see the next training schedules for face-to-face training as well as upcoming webinars. And here's the one I was telling you about for advanced MedDRA coding. It's going to be offered in English in March, but you can choose the language that you prefer. You can filter by the language, you can filter by the course you're interested in. Folks that were asking about output with secondary SOC and how to leverage secondary SOC. Here's our data analysis and query building with MedDRA, also coming up in February. And here's SMQs coming up in February. And there's a very exciting Let's Code Together. These are very interactive sessions offered in different languages. So please take a look at our offerings and you can choose the one that best suits your needs. But in terms of the web-based browser, so there's two ways to access the web-based browser. The current web-based browser that I showed you was this quick link on the top, but I want to show you our new web-based browser. So under how to use MedDRA, if you go down to tools, so let's take you down to tools and you'll see the different tools of MedDRA. And anybody interested in the MVAT tool or the SMQs tool, those are part of the data analysis and query building with MedDRA demonstrations. But here's our browsers. So if you click on browsers, on the right hand here, there's two links. The link on the top is the existing quick link. It's the same one that I showed you before, but I want to show you our new web-based browser. And you can actually go in with me. And as we're clicking along, you can click along with me. The access information is available to you in the welcome message. So if you look at the question box, that welcome message and the question box, the one on the bottom, I believe, Hannah, is that correct? At the bottom of that message is your login information for the new web-based browser.
Correct.
Awesome. So let's click that and go in. It's going to ask you for a MedDRA ID and password. You can use the temporary credentials that we have in our welcome message, or you can use your own organization-specific MedDRA ID and password. Now, if you don't know your own organization-specific MedDRA ID and password, if you go back to our website, on the top hand corner, right hand corner, that SSA, that self-service application, as long as you have an email address that belongs to the domain of your organization, then you should be able to retrieve your MedDRA ID and your MedDRA password. But for today's purposes, you do have the temporary credentials available to you. They're good through the end of the week, and let's log in. before I show you everything, I'm going to restore default settings. So I just went on this cogwheel to restore default settings to kind of start with the very basic view of what you're going to see. When you log into the new web-based browser, and if some of you are experienced coders, as we saw before, on the line, you may find this a little bit different than the previous web-based browser that you were used to. But the intent of the new display of the web-based browser is to simplify the search function, because the search function is the most commonly used function, or commonly the function that is most commonly used for the web-based browser. Now you'll notice that there's two major planes that in your screen. The one on the left is the hierarchical view. So you see all the 27 system organ classes with pluses next to them that you can expand. And the one on the right is pretty much empty except for the search text box, which is where you put in your information to look for something. When you first log in with the default settings, when you restore the default settings, you'll see that it pulls up the most recent MedDRA version. Now, for those who understand MedDRA, they know that 28 is not yet officially released, and that is correct. So they are testing the new release on MedDRA. So for our purposes today, we're going to stick with the current MedDRA version release, which is 27.1. It's going to default to English, and it's going to default to this view. So how would I look up a term if I just opened up the web-based browser and I'm looking up a term and I'm not sure where to start? So let's say I'm looking up a term that has to do with a disorder in the eyelid. A few different options. I can put in eyelid and I can put in enter and see how many I can find. So just putting in eyelid and hitting enter, that's all I did. I put an eyelid in the box and I hit enter, and I see on the top here there's 239 search results. Now those 239 are across all the different levels of MedDRA. So there's 178 that are LLT level terms with the word eyelid. There's 57 PTs and 4 HLTs. But I also see that a lot of the output has this red box. And we just learned that LLTs with the red box are non-current. They are not meant to be used for coding. So that seems like a large number to go through. Maybe can I not show the non-current LLTs? Yes, I can not show them. So I go back to settings. So I go to settings and the display options. So if I don't want the non-currents, I can just untick the non-current, and I can see right now I don't see any more red boxes, and there's 212. So now it went down a little bit. Well, what's these other options? If I'm interested in the numeric code, and we said every single term in MedDRA has an 8-digit numeric code. If I'm interested in showing the numeric code, I just click Show Codes, and I can see the numbers now. If I don't want them, I can untick it. If I want to see what's this synonym list, and if I click the synonym list, I can see what the synonyms are in MedDRA. So let's see examples of synonyms. Synonyms are basically defaulted to search. So the web-based browser defaults to pull up synonyms. So for example, if I put in bleed, it looks up bleeding, bleeds, hemorrhage, hemorrhagic, and so on, so that it can collect as many different types of terms that are bleeding terms but are worded differently. Same for epilepsy. So if I put in convulsion, it's going to pull up convulsive, epilepsia, epileptic, epilepsy, and so on and so forth. And heart is cardiac, kidney is renal, liver hepatic, and such. So these are the synonyms. Okay, so I pulled it down to 212, but there's still a lot of information. Let's say I'm interested in a congenital disorder of the eyelid. So I know that I need to be in the congenital system organ class. I need to find a term that takes me to the congenital system organ class, but I'm not sure how many there are. I see a couple here. So if I click on the congenital eyelid malformation, I can expand and see here's my preferred term, and my preferred term already links to 3 HLTs. So it is multi-axial. So is there an easier way for me to find all congenital terms that are eyelid? I go back to my settings and to my search filters. So It's not the display options I'm interested now, it's my search filters. And if I expand that, I see that it's already defaulted to use the synonym list. It's already defaulted to show me all search results, whether they contain or are exact. So meaning that if I put in a term here, and let's say eyelid abscess, if I put eyelid abscess, it didn't find exactly an eyelid abscess. It didn't find me a lexical variant, meaning lexical meaning the same words but in different order. But it found me terms that contain these two words, abscess of eyelid or eyelid abscess drainage or eyelid abscess NOS. But let me take you back to eyelid because it had a lot of terms. And I was trying to find congenital terms for eyelid. I can pull up this show as system organ class and SMQ filters. If I click on show SOC and SMQ filters, I'll see that it brought up this panel on the right-hand side, again with the same 27 system organ classes. Because basically what I'm telling the browser is, I want to find a term that has eyelid in it, but I want it to be in the congenital system organ class. And then I hit search. And now it's down to 9. So now it's easier for me. So if I know that I am looking at a congenital term and it's an eyelid congenital term, I can just put in eyelid and click congenital SOG, and it pulls up all the terms that have eyelid with congenital. And of course, it defaults to show me the LLTs, but I can still see it at the PT level or the HLT level. Now, let's say that, okay, I'm interested in congenital eyelid malformation, but is there something in this PT? I know that PT aggregates sibling LLTs. Is there an LLT that's closer to my verbatim? What I can do is I can right click on my preferred term and I can tell the tool, take me to this preferred term as it exists in the hierarchy. Go to my browser. It's going to ask me under which system organ class are you looking. I'm going to stick with congenital, but I can go to I can go to any of them. But I know it's a congenital term, so I'm going to stick to congenital. It's going to take me to that PT in that system organ class, and I can expand it, and I can see what other LLTs exist under it if I want one that is a little bit closer to my verbatim. Or I can look at what other PTs are there that talk about congenital and eyelid? Because they're all under the same HLT of eyelid disorders congenital. And because I'm looking at the grouping terms now, another option is, let me just start over. Another option is I can do a top-down approach. I know that I'm interested in congenital disorders, so I can just toggle open the system organ class congenital. I know I'm interested in an eye congenital disorder, so I can toggle open the eye, and I know I'm interested in an eyelid disorder, so I can toggle open the HLT eyelid disorders and then pick from these the one that is closest to my verbatim. So there's two ways that you can search in the browser, either a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. So I hope that that was a helpful overview of the browser. Other settings that you can choose from. Uh, let's do the navigation bar. So let's say I'm always dealing with different languages and I want to add different languages to my view. So I can do additional languages. But even if I don't specify the languages in my search box, I can always search in any language of MedDRA that my data exists in. But if I want to change my primary language, let's say to French, I can certainly do that. I can also add two additional languages. Let's say I want to add Chinese and Finnish. And you'll notice that as I add languages, it's showing me all the languages that I added. So I can add up to 3 languages. So let me just restore my default settings. And what about my interface language? Can I choose my interface language? Yes, you can choose your interface language. If my local language is something other than English, and I find it easier to do my interface in, for example, French, I can change my interface language to French, and it automatically changes my primary language to French as well. So let me just go back to default settings. Okay, so what else can I show you? So the one of the new things about the this new web-based browser is that it shows me any mapping associations. So for example, let's put dry eyes. And let me just toggle back and restore my default settings. This is funny. It's not showing me dry eye. I think that I just need to exit and go back in. Okay. All right. So let's say I'm interested in the dry eye, and I want to see if it has any mapping associations. Basically, all I need to do is I need to right click and open details and occurrences. So when I right click on a term in my output from my search results and I choose details and occurrences, it gives me all the details about that particular term. So here's my term. It's going to tell me what the numeric code is, that this term is a term that exists in multiple SMQs, and it tells me all the different SMQs. And at the bottom here, it tells me whether or not there are mapping associations between this term and other terminologies. So in this particular instance, I can see that dry eye in MedDRA is associated with a mapping association to SNOMED, and it gives me the SNOMED term and the SNOMED code. So I thought that was an interesting addition as well. Okay, so when I go from the top down, there's one more thing that I wanted to show you. So let's just go, for example, cardiac arrhythmias, and these different types of rate and rhythm disorders. You're going to notice that there's a lot of different colors. So why are there different color boxes? So here's the legend under this hamburger menu. Here's the legend, and the legend basically explains if you are looking in your hierarchical view and you see different color boxes, here's the definitions. If it's a red box, that means this term has no other system organ class that is linked to. So this particular term, the arrhythmia or the agonal rhythm, they don't have any other system organ classes that they are linked to. So you see them in a red box. If you see a blue box, that means it is a multi-axial term, and the system organ class that you are looking at right now is the primary. So arrhythmia neonatal is linked to both arrhythmia and the cardiac disorders, and this one is the primary system organ class. The green box means that this is a multi-axial term, and the system organ class that you're looking at is not the primary. So if I open the details for this one, I can see that the primary system organ class is the congenital. That is the one that has the blue box. So I hope I kind of clarified the legends. But I see that we are at close to half past the hour, so I want to go over some of the uh, exercises that we spoke about. I don't want to lose the opportunity to have you go through that. So just a summary of our browsers. There are 3 different browsers. The web-based browser is the online browser. It is connected to the internet. So it has to be connected to the internet for it to work, but it has all the MedDRA files in it and in all languages. The desktop browser is available to be downloaded onto your desktop, but it will be downloaded as an empty tool. So it won't have any MedDRA files in it. So if you want to use the desktop browser, it means you need to grab whatever MedDRA files you would like to work with in whatever languages and download them to your desktop browser. And you'll need to add whatever new release that comes out of MedDRA every 6 months. Now, the desktop browser has not yet been updated to reflect the new interface screen that I just showed you with the new web-based browser, but it is available to you. And the desktop browser, of course, the advantage is that you don't need to be connected to the internet to work, and it has all the functionalities of the web-based browser. The mobile browser is a URL. It's not an app, but it is designed with a large interface to be able to be displayed clearly on smartphones. And you are able to search all the system organ classes and SMQs on the mobile browser, but you can't export search results because it's not intended for working in analysis and exporting results. All of the browsers require your MedDRA ID and password to work. They can all support all the different MedDRA languages, and you can choose whichever interface language that you like to work in. And you can export your search results in the desktop browser and the web-based browser. And of course, for supplemental data, so supplemental meaning that this is information that has been approved to be in the next release version of MedDRA, but it's not out yet. So the supplemental version is available only on the web-based browser because it is the one that is online. And of course, all browsers will show you primary and secondary link information, the desktop browser and the web-based browser. And you can upload terms. You can upload your own data and use the tools that exist in the browser, and you can use advanced search options. And we went over the browser demonstration already. We will be offering um, a more detailed look at the new web-based browser. So take a look at our offerings for upcoming webinars for that, so you can sign up. Okay, so before we go to the exercises, just a few examples of how you're going to be doing your search. Just as a reminder, when you are receiving a term and you're thinking about coding, it's good to ask yourself, what type of term is this? Do I expect it to be a condition, meaning is it going to go to a site of manifestation system organ class? Do I expect it to be a test result? Is it a lab? Should it be under investigation system organ class? Is it an injury? Is it a social circumstance? So it's good to ask yourself, what type of term am I coding? So here's examples. The patient suffered from an allergic reaction to an antibiotic. So let's go back to our browser and look for allergic reaction. So when I'm looking for allergic reaction, the verbatim itself that I received said the patient suffered from an allergic reaction to an antibiotic. So I see MedDRA has standalone allergic reaction as an exact match. And if I expand that, I see that it goes to the PT hypersensitivity, and it goes to all of these grouping terms until it reaches the immune disorders. But I have different kinds of allergic reactions. I have allergic reaction to analgesics. I have allergic reaction to antibiotics, to bee stings. So if you expand the bee stings, you'll see it's allergy to arthropod sting. So it's more specific than just standalone allergic reaction. I have allergic reaction to food that also goes to a different PT, food allergy. So this is where it's important when you're picking your LLT to be as specific as possible to your reported verbatim. Because if I just pick allergic reaction, I'm taking it to hypersensitivity. But if I pick allergic reaction to antibiotics, then I am selecting the preferred term of drug hypersensitivity, which is a lot more specific than just standalone hypersensitivity. So in my example for the patient suffered from an allergic reaction to an antibiotic, my most specific LLT is the allergic reaction to an antibiotic. The second example, the patient states she's been experiencing cold sweats. So if I go back here and I look up cold sweats and I hit enter, so there's no results for cold sweats. But if I am thinking about the possibility that LLTs and PTs, like we said, exist at the singular term level rather than plural, and I just put cold sweat, I'm going to find cold sweat as an exact match. So just a quick kind of hint that if you are receiving reports that are Plural terms, try to look for them in a singular. Sometimes that works better at the LLT level. Okay, lab results indicate the patient has increased troponin and increased CPK-MB. So these are cardiac enzymes that are elevated. Now, there is no diagnosis in this report. So all I received from this reporter were two elevated specific lab results. And if you look up in the ICH endorsed guidelines, it will tell you to code everything that you receive. So in this particular example, I should be coding increased troponin separate from increased CPK-MB. So I should capture them both separately. The approach of coding it as increased cardiac enzymes is not a preferred option in the ICH endorsed guidelines. Having said that, I am aware that there are organizations that may prefer that approach. In that case, you do need to be very careful that you document your approach and apply it consistently. What about this one? The patient accidentally took drug Y instead of drug X and became short of breath. So this seems to be a medication error with a clinical sequence. So there was a shortness of breath for this particular patient, and after they accidentally took drug Y instead of drug X. So when we talk about medication errors, just to kind of walk you through. If you're not even sure where to start looking for medication errors, you can always put medication error. So there's my medication error, and you can always go to the browser, right click and go to the browser, and the browser will put you smack in the middle of all the medication errors. So here's my HLT of medication errors, product use errors, and issues. And here's my HLGT, here's my grouping terms. So if I'm not even sure where to start looking, I can go from the top down and I can start looking at all these possible different options that are available for medication errors. So the uh, verbatim itself told me that the patient accidentally took drug Y instead of drug X. So this patient was trying to take a drug, but they took the wrong drug. So they did take the wrong drug, but they took the wrong drug. So they actually did ingest the wrong drug. So maybe I need to be a bit more specific than just wrong drug. So if I put wrong drug in my search function, I can see all the different options that I have in MedDRA talking about the wrong drug. It was not a wrong patient or the wrong device, but it was the wrong drug that was administered. So I think this would be the closest one to my verbatim for the wrong drug administered. But I shouldn't also forget that there was a clinical sequence. So I do need to make sure that I'm coding the shortness of breath for this particular patient. So in this case, I need two LLTs to represent my source verbatim. Okay, a 2-day-old baby noted to have a mild fever. So let's see if I have fever with baby in my browser. So if I put fever and I put baby and I hit enter, I don't see anything. So there's a couple of different ways I can go about this. One way is I can just look up fever. So let's take out baby and just look up fever. And here's my fever. And if I right click pyrexia, because that's the right click pyrexia. Let me just close this. Sometimes the right click needs you to make sure that the details box is closed first before it shows you the options. And I can go to browser. So here's all my febrile disorders. Here's my HLT of febrile disorders, and here's my pyrexia. And if I look over all the possible different options, I might be able to find one that really works for a newborn. So I have fever, neonatal. That works for a 2-day-old baby. Another option, instead of going, pyrexia and looking around pyrexia, I can put another way of saying 2-day-old baby. So if I put fever and newborn and I hit enter, then MedDRA is able to find me neonatal because newborn and neonatal are synonyms in MedDRA. So that's another way of finding the most specific LLT that's a match for my source verbatim. What about this one? So a 35-year-old woman was taking drug X to prevent relapses of multiple sclerosis. And if I go in here into MedDRA and I just put multiple sclerosis, there's about 40 of them. So if I'm not sure which one to select, maybe I can add prevent. And if I hit enter, well, there's no matches. So I don't have the word prevent with multiple sclerosis. What is my standalone prevent? So here's my prevention. Standalone prevention takes me to the preferred term of prophylaxis. So this part of the source verbatim can be seen to code to prophylaxis. So if I go back to my multiple sclerosis and I add prophylaxis instead of prevent, I do see an option now for multiple sclerosis relapse prophylaxis. So in MedDRA, prevention terms and prophylaxis terms are the same, and I can use the prophylaxis to search up prevention terms and find the one that is most specific. Okay, pathological fracture of the neck of the left femur. That's a lot of different information that I'm receiving in this particular report. And is it possible to find a match in MedDRA that is close as possible? So for this one, let me show you the advanced search function. And how to get to the advanced search function is when you are filtering with your search filters, you can select to show the advanced button. So that's how you pull up the advanced search function. If I click on advanced, it's going to ask me, what is it you're looking for? Well, I'm looking for a pathological fracture. Okay, what specifically are you wanting to hope to find? I'm looking for contains femur and contains neck. So can I find something? And yes, it found for me pathological fracture of neck of femur. So it found all of the things that I asked it to find. So you can up to three uh, different search criteria that you can introduce in the advanced search function. If I looked it up under basic and I just pathological fracture, femur, for example, so it's showing me that it has pathological fracture femur and neck of femur, and there's one that is non-current, so I'm not going to be using this for coding. So my verbatim said pathological fracture of neck of the left femur. I don't see a left femur. And you're probably not going to find a lot of left and right laterality terms in MedDRA because they're not going to change the medical concept. In certain medical concepts, right and left laterality may be significant. For example, in brain concepts or ventricle, concepts, heart concepts, right versus left may be medically significant. But in right versus left arm or leg, that's not a medically significant differentiator. So you're not going to find right and left. So in this particular term, my closest option was the pathological fracture of the neck of the femur. Okay, how about this one? Following the procedure, the patient experienced constipation, several days of constipation. So if I just put in constipation, it's telling me it found an exact match of constipation and all of these different verbatims. Do I have a constipation that happened following a procedure? I can see here there's a post-procedural constipation and the post-operative constipation as LLTs. They both go to the same preferred term of post-procedural constipation. So are they both correct? Well, theoretically, they're both correct, but the one that is closest to your verbatim is the one that has the word procedure because your verbatim said following the procedure. So in this case, I would choose the post-procedural constipation. Okay. How about this one? Death and other outcomes, just like the example that one of you asked about, and thank you for that question. So this 66-year-old man died from a ruptured aortic aneurysm. So the report is giving me the gender of the patient, which is outside the scope of MedDRA, the age of the patient, again, outside the scope of MedDRA, the fact that the patient died, and the cause of death was a ruptured aortic aneurysm. Well, we just saw in the ICH endorsed guidelines that you have an outcome of death with an underlying cause of death. You don't need to report the death separately. So in this particular case, I am looking for the aortic aneurysm that ruptured. So let's see if I can find. There's a lot of aortic aneurysms, so let me add the word rupture and see if I can limit the number of outputs. So out of these 6, I have the aortic aneurysm rupture. I don't have the site specified, whether it's descending. I don't have the fact that it's dissecting, and it didn't say that they didn't know the site. So the verbatim did not specify that the site was not known or not specified. So I don't need to choose one of these. And of course, I'm not going to find an LLT for fatal ruptured aortic aneurysm because the fact that the patient died is captured as an outcome. It is in its own data field. So in this particular instance, the LLT that I choose will be the ruptured aortic aneurysm. Of course, MedDRA, we said, has options for product quality issues. So in this particular case, the reporter said that the product was counterfeit. Well, there's no clinical sequelae here, so I have a couple of options in this case. I can look up, for example, counterfeit and see what the options are. So I do have product counterfeit, or the fact that a counterfeit product was administered. Well, it didn't tell me that this counterfeit product was administered. The verbatim only said that the product was counterfeit. So this is my best option. But of course, I can look around in the relevant system organ class. I can approach it just the way I can do that for the medication errors. I can go to browser. So in my browser, I can see that I am in the SOC product issues, and I can see that there are 2 main HLGTs or 2 main grouping terms for the product issues SOC. There's device issues, and then there's product quality, supply, distribution, manufacturing, and quality system issues. And so if I'm looking for something specific about product issues and I'm not sure where to go, I can always expand or toggle open this system organ class and look through all of the different HLTs that are in that HLGT of product issues. If my product is a device, I can go into the device issues HLGT. So in this particular instance, for my verbatim, this was a counterfeit product. What about this one? Social circumstances. So the patient was confined to a wheelchair. If I just pull up the word wheelchair and see what comes out, I'm going to see the option of wheelchair user. And this particular option exists in the system organ class of social circumstances. So it does offer me the ability to choose from social circumstances. Okay, so in this particular example, the pharmacist made a mistake in compounding the medication. And again, this is a medication error. So I have the option of going to the HLGT of medication errors like we saw before, or I can just write compounding. And if I hit compounding, I can see that there was a product compounding error or a product compounding quality issue. And the verbatim said the pharmacist made a mistake in compounding the medication. So it is a product compounding error, goes to the same PT, and it falls under the system organ class of injury and procedural complications. Now, if I just, as curiosity, if I, and again, double click it and go to browser, here's my product preparation error. Here's my PT, and it has all the different LLTs under it. So the verbatim as I receive it can be coded to the closest matching LLT, which is the product compounding error, but it would be already aggregated with other product preparation errors in my PT level. And of course, there are different stages of product errors that I can choose from based on my reported verbatim. There's monitoring errors, dispensing errors, confusion errors, prescribing errors, and administration errors. So depending on my verbatim, I can choose the closest one. So just a reminder that MedDRA has options available for medical history, adverse events, investigations, surgeries, post-surgical complications, social history, medical history, and so on, but not for age groupings or ethnicity or gender. So here's where we're going to start the hands-on exercises. Just as a reminder, you can access the web-based browser with the temporary credentials we provided to you. You can access your own. If you have your own organizational credentials, you can use them. Try to find the LLT that's closest to the verbatim and either follow a bottom-up or top-down approach. And please use the poll EV, which here's another look at the QR code so you can log in. Now, I know we're 10 minutes, 12 minutes before, so we'll have time to go through. There's 5 examples that you can test yourselves on. But after that, if folks have questions, I'm happy to stay on, myself and Hannah, to answer your questions. Okay, here's the first one. She was diagnosed with pneumonia caused by COVID-19 infection. So when you look at this verbatim, she was diagnosed with pneumonia caused by COVID-19 infection. You're going to ask yourself, what is the term in MedDRA that is the closest possible option to this verbatim? Is there a term in MedDRA that allows me to capture all the information I received from my reporter? Okay, I see answers starting to come in, but we're going to see them now. So let's take a look. Okay, so I see that preferred is only pneumonia. Well, I see a lot of terms that come over for pneumonia. So let's take a look at pneumonia. If you hit pneumonia, there's 331 LLT, not LLTs, all search results, including PTs and LLTs and pneumonia. But there's a lot of different specific types of pneumonia, right? And there's types of pneumonia that already have a causative agent. So you see candidal pneumonia, chlamydial pneumonia. You're going to see uh, certain types of pneumonia as well without the causative agent like congenital or eosinophilic, hemorrhagic pneumonia. So we have a wide selection of terms in MedDRA. When you have a report come in that offers a bit more detail, try to find a match in MedDRA that is the closest possible match to the entirety of the information you received. So in this particular case, we do have a COVID-19 pneumonia that has links to the infection sock as well as the respiratory sock. So thank you for everybody who submitted the COVID-19 pneumonia. It's more specific than coronavirus pneumonia because COVID-19 is the specific type of coronavirus that caused this pneumonia. So the correct answer is COVID-19 pneumonia, and that's why we selected it because it has the most level of information as you received it from your verbatim. Let's try another one. Woman ingested her husband's blood pressure drug by mistake. So she ingested her husband's blood pressure drug by mistake. And the question is, was she trying to take a medication or not? So she didn't take drug X instead of drug Y. She took her husband's blood pressure medication, but she took it by mistake. Let's see if the types of, okay. So, okay, let me clear. And accidental ingestion of drug. I like this accidental ingestion of drug because it has a bit of few details. First, the fact that the drug was in fact ingested. So she did, in fact, ingest the drug. And that's a very important point to make when you have a medication error. Did the patient swallow it or not? So she did ingest it. So, yes, it was an ingestion of the drug, and it was accidental. So, thank you very much. I do agree with you. It was an accidental ingestion of the drug. You are capturing not just the fact that it was accidental, but also the fact that it was ingested. So, yes, very nice. Accidental ingestion of drug. What about this one? The patient developed hyponatremia while hospitalized. So they developed hyponatremia while hospitalized. Can you find the closest LLT that has all the information that is reported in your verbatim in one LLT. That's what you try to do as a coder. You try to find all the information in one. I'm starting to see information coming in. So I see hyponatremia. I see hospital-acquired hypothermia, which is not the same thing as hyponatremia. I see hospital hyponatremia and hospital-acquired hyponatremia. So let me just make sure that we are picking terms, and let me show you something that's easy to do. So this is hospital, and well, let me start with hyponatremia first. Hyponat, and just go with hyponat. So hyponat has 36 results in MedDRA, 27 of which are LLTs. And I see at the top hospital-acquired hyponatremia. So I see that there's two of them. There's a hospital-acquired hyponatremia with an AE and a hospital-acquired hyponatremia where hyponatremia is just spelled with an E. They both should be, to the same preferred term of hyponatremia, which is correct. And so they are already sibling LLTs. They will be aggregated at the PT level. But which one is the one that best matches my verbatim? My verbatim has patient-developed hyponatremia with an AE, so this is the closest one. And if I want to copy this over and just give it to someone, like I said, if you close this box, you'll be able to right-click. I can copy the term. So when you're trying to copy it over, you can just copy the term and then paste it wherever you want. So if you want to add this to an email to a colleague or add it to the PolyEV, you can do it with a right click. So hospital-acquired hyponatremia with an AE is the one we're looking for. There it is. Thank you so much. Okay, what's the next one? The patient, so hospital-acquired hyponatremia with an AE. So the next one is nurse noticed that the injection solution had an unusual odor. So the injection solution had an unusual odor. How would you even start to look for that? So you know there's no clinical sequence here. So there's nothing that the patient took it. It's not a medication error. Nobody ingested that medication. Nobody was exposed to it. It's just that the nurse noticed that the injection had an unusual odor. Product odor abnormal. That's very nice. So if you go in here, if you go to the browser and you just put odor, you can see a lot of different options. But remember, we said we can limit our selection to a certain system organ class if we want to. And I know this is a product issue. There's no clinical sequence. This is a product issue. So if I click product issues and hit search again, now I have the terms that exist in the product issues with the word odor. So I don't know if my device, if this injection solution was within a component of a device. My verbatim does not specify that. It just says that the injection solution had an unusual odor. So is it a product? Yes, it's a product. So this would be the closest one for me. And then the odor has an ODOR, which is the spelling I put. Even though the PT is in the English spelling, that's fine. So the product odor abnormal with an ODOR. Yes, thank you for finding that. So this is the correct answer, the product odor with an ODOR. This is the last example. So elderly woman complained her arm was tender where she had received the seasonal flu vaccine. Okay, so the elderly woman complained the arm was tender where she received the seasonal flu vaccine. So how would I start looking for this? What kind of root words would I put in the browser to look for this? I see the responses coming in. I see 2 so far. There's more. Let's take a look. Okay. Injection site reaction, vaccination site tenderness. Okay, so let's take a look at the browser. So it is the site where she received her vaccine. So let's put vaccine and site and hit enter. Oh, but I'm still in product issues, so I need to clear my selection and hit search. So there's 181 possible terms that have these two roots in them, vaccine and site. So if I know that she had tenderness in her arm, so yes, let's try tender. So I have vaccination site tenderness. It doesn't specify the arm, but it does specify that it was at the site of vaccination. Well, what about injection site tenderness? So site tenderness can be in different types of situations. It can be an application site, it can be a catheter site, it can be an implant site. And as you can see, as we go through, they each have their own preferred term. So yes, it can be an injection site and it can be a vaccination site. And because vaccination site and injection site are not necessarily the same thing, so not every injection is a vaccine, right? So vaccination site, because of the nature of the term itself, that it is a vaccination related term, it has its own preferred term. So in these kinds of situations, even though this is not technically wrong, it is an injection site, but there is a specific preferred term for vaccination site terminologies in MedDRA, so please select the one that is closest to the verbatim. For this particular situation, a vaccination site tenderness would be the one that is most specific and representative of this example. All right, so we went over today the MedDRA scope structure and characteristics. We discussed coding conventions and introduced you to the ICH endorsed coding conventions. We went over the MedDRA browser and the new MedDRA browser and some coding examples on your own. So these are a few resources that are useful to you. And at this time, I will open it up for Q&A. And as a reminder, if anybody needs to drop off, we are at the top of the hour. You're welcome to drop off. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to stay on.
Wonderful. Our first question asks, for two different PTs, are two different entries required?
Uh, yes, I mean, you cannot assign two different PTs to the same verbatim depending on, well, let me retract that, depending on the way that your database is built. So if I understood you correctly, when you want to assign two different PTs, you may assign them to the same report depending on how your database is configured in your organization. There are organizations where it's a one-to-one correlation, meaning that every report will only have one LLT assigned. And of course, we said every LLT is only linked to one PT. But if, like that example we said with the two cardiac enzymes, and you want to assign two different LLTs that route to two different PTs, can you do that? The answer depends on your organizational decision how to configure the database. If your database allows you to assign more than one LLT for the same report, then you can. If your database does not allow you to do that, then it's an internal conversation between the stakeholders within your organization as to how to get there. Do you, for example, query the reporter to split them, or can you use any kind of enhancements within the database to allow you to assign more than one LLT, or does the database automatically allow you to assign as many LLTs as needed? So it's really an organizational specific answer. Any other questions?
Fantastic. Our next question is about one of the examples about accidentally taking the medication.
Mhm.
They asked if you could explain more about why it wouldn't be wrong patient received medication.
Okay, so I think this is about the woman, right? The woman who took her husband's medication by mistake. I think the question is about this one.
Yes.
Okay, so in this particular report, all the information you have is that a woman took somebody else's medication by mistake. We don't know that she is supposed to take a medication. I mean, we don't know that she's a patient who was supposed to take a medication. This scenario does not specify that she was intending to take a medication, that she was herself a patient who was expecting to receive a medication. So, for example, let's say that the blood pressure medication looked like a lozenge, or maybe it looked like a TikTok, or maybe it looked like or maybe she didn't even know this was a medication. Maybe he had sprinkled it on his cookie to eat it, and she ate the cookie. So it's the report itself does not specify that she was expecting to take a drug, but she ingested a drug. So she accidentally ingested a drug. She wasn't meaning to. So it's good to ask yourself as you are going through the different scenarios, and I know medication errors can be a bit overwhelming when you first look at them. We do have, incidentally, a webinar specifically to medication errors. So look for that in our webinar offerings. But when you look at any term that indicates to you there was a medication error that happened, you need to ask yourself a few questions. Was this intentional? Was this accidental? Did she intend to take a medication or not? And then you ask yourself, did she ingest it? Did she not ingest it? So you're going to ask yourself a few questions to get to the most specific one. But in this particular example, we don't even know that she intended to take a medication. She ingested it accidentally. So that's why this LLT is the best option. Any other questions?
Perfect. Our next question is about how to get certificates. So I'll just remind everyone that certificates for this session will be available 2 business days after the conclusion of the webinar from the MedDRA self-service application. You'll just need to use the email that you used to join this session, and then you'll be able to get your certificate. Our next question says, I'm sorry to ask this because it was already explained, but could you please repeat what is the difference between hyponatremia and hyponatremia? What difference makes that AE and E?
Oh, it's just British spelling versus English spelling. So let's go to hyponatremia and okay, hyponatremia. Okay, so when MedDRA first started, MedDRA was built off of an ontology that already was in existence. So what is now known as the MHRA back in the early 90s had already started a collection of medical terms for the purposes of standardization. Now, MHRA is based in England, and England have their English spelling, which is a little bit different than American spelling, or as somebody once explained it to me, it's proper spelling, the English spelling. So when you look at the terminologies that exist in MedDRA, at the LLT level, you're going to see hyponatremia with the US American spelling, which is, tremia with an EMIA. But anybody who's familiar with reading medical um, books and medical publications know that the British spelling for many medical terminologies has the AE for a lot of different terms. Same for anemia. So let's put anemia. You're going to see anemia with an E, but also if I put AE, or I can just expand so you can see the PT will have the AE spelling. That is the British English spelling of these medical terminologies. And you're going to see the British English spelling in PT terms and above. But American, if there is a separate American English spelling for the same term, you'll see it at the LLT level. That's the only difference. But it's not your choice. You're not going to see American spellings at the PT level. Anemia will always be AE in MedDRA. Any other questions?
Fantastic. I think that was our last question. I'm not seeing anything new in the chat.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you for those who stayed on with us a few minutes. I hope you found this enjoying a good session and useful to you, and I hope to see you in a future webinar. Thank you so much.